Hey there everyone, I was totally screwing around with all these filters and I am not completely set up yet, so just hang in there with me today. We're going to be doing Elemental Earth Magic. I hope that this filter isn't going to be like too distracting. I think once I back up it's not going to be quite so jarring of an effect. I'm just going to get myself set up here on Facebook as well, because I did not do that thing already. So usually I do these live streams on Fridays at 4. But this Friday at 4, I'm going to be on the road on my way to Maine. So I figured that we would do a little bit early. This is a time I usually do a little live thing anyway, so I was hoping that that would still, be a time that worked relatively well for folks. Sorry, this is being a little extra finicky here. I think I'll have to add a description after. We're just going to go live. I take it back. Magic, copy. Yeah, that's quick, we'll do that. Live mini class, Earth Magic. Go live. Alright, now we're heading in the right direction, so thank you for hanging in there with me. Let's scoot this. Just a smidge. Alright, get back up here. Alright, so we're going to talk about Earth Magic today. So this is the first kind of official installment of my Elemental Magic series, and I'm pretty excited about it because Earth in particular is sort of like the element that I generally connect to the best. So this is a topic that I've been kind of excited about. So in my pre-show originally I was going to do a little talking about I think I said my top 5 crystals and gemstones that I think are good kind of basics to always have around. And I'll cover over that real quick, and then we'll get into what y'all came here for, which is Earth Magic, Elemental Earth Magic to be specific. So the first gemstone that I think that everybody should have, especially if they're working with gemstones now, as a really quick, hey Tabitha, we're going to be talking about Elemental Earth Magic today. But as a little bit, I was going to do a little pre-show here talking about top 5 gemstones that I think everyone should have. But as a little bit of a disclaimer, I guess I'll say that there are some really questionable ethics to the gemstone industry. So do your research and only work with gemstones if that's what feels right to you. I've been doing it for years, and I tend to not buy all that often, and I try really hard to be mindful about where I buy from, but that's a whole other topic. But moving away from that, the first stone that I always think is a great idea to have, I feel like within every type of magic, there is one particular ingredient that is sort of like a wild card, that you could use it to represent anything. And in gemstone magic, that is clear quartz. So clear quartz is really high on my list. I do actually happen to incidentally have a piece here. This is actually a little cluster of, the filter and the light is totally washing that out. But you can kind of use your imagination. You probably know what clear quartz looks like. Clear quartz is great because it can be used for pretty much anything that you want to do, for any intention. I do think that it is especially good for the storage and directing of energy. It is also good for protection magic and also for purification and clarity, because it's literally clear. Hello. The second one I would have to say is citrine. Citrine is a really big one. I mentioned it in my post earlier this week, yesterday, about how citrine is one that I kind of work with quite a bit. Citrine is one of the few stones that actually does not absorb negative energy. It generally absorbs it and transmutes it into positive energy, which means that it doesn't need to be cleansed. Now, a lot of people have found, again, your mileage may vary, that they feel like it works a lot better if they do. Just realized that I did not open up a second window here. That when they do start working with it, that they do feel like it works better if it's cleansed periodically, but it doesn't need it to be. And citrine is also really good for issues with self-confidence and willpower and personal power as well. I would say number 3. Now, as interesting note, these first 3 are all silicon based. Quartz, citrine, and amethyst are all different varieties of quartz, basically. So the number 3 I would have to say is amethyst. Now I think everyone knows what amethyst looks like. This is, again, happens to be a piece. Oh, I have a piece of citrine over here too. Look at that. So 4 of the 5 I'm going to be talking about here today, I happen to have in my tray over here, which is where I keep a lot of my most commonly used tarot decks, so kind of case in point. So this is actually natural citrine. There's a lot of fake citrine out there that's actually heat-treated amethyst, but this is the natural variety. It's not quite as orangey as the stuff that you find out there. That's the fake stuff. That said, the heat-treated amethyst does, of course, have its own properties, and it is certainly valuable. And the authentic stuff is actually really hard to come by, so I don't think there's anything wrong with using it, as long as you're kind of aware that it's not legit. Anyway, getting back to amethyst, so this is actually a piece of spirit amethyst. Again, the filter and my light is washing it out a little bit. You can kind of make out the color a little bit when it's... Oh goodness. Well, you could make out the color. Amethyst is another one that's really good for psychic protection, for dreaming, and intuition. It's just a beautiful stone to have around. It has a really lovely energy. Some people do use amethyst for, hey, Promised Land Vintage, we're going to be doing elemental earth magic here today. I'm just talking about my top 5 crystals and gemstones that I think every witch should be loose, because I recognize that everybody's opinion on the industry and the ethics of the gemstone and crystal kind of industry varies. We talked about clear quartz, we talked about citrine, and we were just talking about amethyst. Some people do, similarly to the way people use, hey, Promised Land Vintage, similarly to the way that people use citrine for cleansing, people will often use amethyst for cleansing. Like they'll take an amethyst bed and put stones on it to charge or cleanse them. The only thing with that is that amethyst does definitely need to be cleansed periodically, unlike citrine, which is kind of in a gray area. So the number 4 crystal that I think that every witch should have is selenite. So that one is over here too. So the 5th one I actually don't have to show you. I have seen in some groups that this particular stone is actually more accurately something called Icelandic spar, not selenite, but they're often sold as the same thing. But for the sake of our conversation today, I'm just going to call it selenite because that's what most people know it as. So you can see it has this sort of white iridescent kind of look to it. It actually has really, really small fibrous crystals that run lengthwise, which is what gives it that iridescent look to it. Selenite, much like citrine, does not absorb negative energy. It doesn't hold negative energy. It absorbs it and then it transmutes it and turns it into positive energy. I keep a piece of selenite pretty much in every satin spar, Tabitha says. But I keep a piece of this with every tarot deck, basically, in the bag that it normally gets stashed in, so that way I feel like it's constantly being sort of refreshed and cleansed without me having to put too much thought or effort into it, because I'm kind of lazy. And then the final stone that I think that every witch should have, that I don't have to show you, but you can probably imagine what it looks like, is black obsidian. Obsidian black, any black stone in particular, is really good for protection magic. If you've ever watched any of my protection magic episodes, classes, videos, whatever you want to call them, I do talk about black obsidian and how any black stone really is very good for protection, but obsidian is sort of like the number one that most people think of when they think of protection magic. It can be worn, it can be kept in your space. A lot of readers like to keep it on the table near where they do their readings. It's just a great stone to have around, and it's also called volcanic glass. So it's black and it's shiny and it's beautiful. So 10 out of 10. So that's what I have for you for my top 5 crystals that I think every witch should have. So now that we've talked about that, let's talk about earth magic, because that's what you came here for, and I'm glad that you guys made it. I know that this is an off day, so I super appreciate you being here. I just realized I got halfway through opening this for myself and then I didn't, so hold on just a moment. I'm gonna blow this up, and it's slow, very slow. Blow up. Citrine is one of the few stones that I eat. Alright, my connection actually does not absorb. There we go, perfect. Alright, thank you for your patience again. So, earth magic. So, in the most Wiccan and witchcraft systems that most of us recognize and use, earth is associated with the direction of the north. Now, I don't know if you joined me last week when I talked about the intro to elemental magic. Of course, every system has a different association for what directions and what elements go where. And I talked about how the association of each element is very European based in ideology. So there really is no wrong direction to associate Earth with. especially if you don't generally work within a kind of European magical system or belief. But oftentimes, I feel like Earth is associated with the West in one particular indigenous system that I studied previously. So, you kind of have to look inside yourself and meditate on it and feel what works best for you. Earth is associated with cold and dry. So once upon a time, the alchemists and the doctors believed that people could use the elements east, air, south, fire. Yes, oh yes, I know what the other ones are. Of course, I just want to talk specifically about Earth today. The doctors and the alchemists, they generally believe that the elements could be used to explain pretty much anything and everything in life, including maladies and sickness and disease. So they were using these sort of cold, dry associations in the medicine that they were using and treating people with, perhaps not overly effectively, but they did the best that they could at the time. And some really quick correspondences for other things that are generally associated with the element of Earth. Midnight, or nighttime in general, especially midnight. I would say, the hours of, and again, I'm just spitballing here, but the hours of like 10 p.m. to, 3 a.m. or maybe even 4 a.m. Kind of the witching hour, as people refer to it. All of those times are very much associated with Earth. It's also, winter time is associated with the element of Earth. So is the new, or more accurately, I would say the dark moon. And just really quick, because next week we're going to be talking a lot more about the new moon, because next weekend is the new moon, that the dark moon is when the moon is completely black, when there's nothing showing at all, and the new moon is when you get that little bit of sliver showing, or Diana's bow, as some people call it. So when you hear me referring to the dark moon versus the new moon, that's what I'm referring to, just in case anybody out there is confused. And so, likewise, talking about the Earth being associated with midnight, with winter time, and the new moon, and also death and dying. So, and I think that this correspondence really sank in when I was regularly going to a lot of indigenous, well, it wasn't run by indigenous people, but it was an indigenous tradition with lineage, that was sweat lodges. And in the East, we would have a prayer round that was represented by each direction. In the East, we prayed for children, and in the South, we prayed for mothers and fathers, and in the West, we prayed for grandparents, and in the North, it was more ancestral magic. So in the North, you have this idea of death and dying. It's the in-between place, or if you think about it as the way the sun moves, it rises in the East, and then it reaches its peak in the South, and it sets in the West. And then from the west to the east is all nighttime. So north is right dead center of that. It's midnight. It's in the middle of the night, so it's death, it's dying, it's winter. It's that whole energy. And every element has different beings that is often associated with that element based on folklore. Gnomes are one of the really big ones. Elves, dryads, I'm sure there are others, but those are kind of like the big three. You might think fairies, but fairies I tend to associate more with air in the East, which again we were going to talk about next time we do elemental magic, which I don't know off the top of my head what that is, but of course it will be happening. I have all of them scheduled. I just don't remember when exactly it's happening right now, but soonish. And each element has a being that's associated with it, and each of those species, I guess we can say, has a guardian or a king that is associated with it. And the king of the dwarves, or gnomes, is called King Gob. Or Gob. I've only ever read it, so I could be mispronouncing it. But he is the king, or the guardian, of the elemental spirits. So that's just a little quick overview of some of the associations that go with the element of Earth. As far as actually working with the element, if you're doing spells or you're doing rituals, the question becomes, who and how do you call the element? So I talked about this a fair bit in the intro about the idea of the element as a force of nature versus a anthropomorphized being. So I talk about the gnomes, the dryads. Those are beings as opposed to the element of Earth as an elemental natural force. So they're two kind of different but similar things, and everybody tends to approach it differently. And I know me, sometimes I approach it differently, even from season to season. So if I'm working, for hypothetically here, in Beltane or Midsummer, which are very much associated with the other world and with the Fae, sometimes I'm going to be a lot more likely to work with the elements as beings, because to me those feel like they go hand in hand. But other times in the year I will tend to work with them as elemental forces, mostly because my personal practice is I don't know, it feels almost atheo-pagan, but not, which is atheist and paganism together, which a lot of people think that's sort of like, those are opposites, but it's has more of a psychological approach as opposed to a religious approach, if that makes any sense. If you have any questions, of course, about that, because some people might be confused, put them in any comment, actually, about anything. Feel free to include it in the comments below. This is supposed to be a back and forth. I don't necessarily want it to just be me talking at you. I want us to get to know each other and chat, so feel free to put anything you want in the comments. Within reason, obviously. So as far as how to choose, who to choose, I think it's really important, in addition to, the beings that you work with, the energy of the season that you might be working within, you also want to think about the energies and the intentions that you're working with, as far as how you're going to visualize them. As far as Earth is concerned, let's say that you are doing a self-care ritual and you want to invite in the elements. Now, not everybody invites the elements into every ritual. Again, personal preference, your mileage may vary, etc., etc. But, let's say you're doing a self-care ritual as opposed to, my house is going to be foreclosed on and I need stability, which is a really big deal. For the self-care ritual, as far as feeling stable and secure within yourself, just for the sake of, personal maintenance, you might say, imagine a cave, which is very small and warm and inviting, as opposed to if you're doing something really big and really monumental, you might choose to, visualize a mountain. So you're having, this big difference of size and scale and intensity of the element that you're working with. Another thing to think about when you're doing forces of nature versus being, or elemental spirits in general, because there is a little bit of a difference between inviting the elemental spirits versus the elemental guardian. Generally, and my mother-in-law, who is a high priestess and a total badass, actually taught a class about the elements in my shop when I used to own it. And she talked about, of course, I'm not stealing her material or anything, this is in great part original, but one of the things that she said that I think really bears repeating, because it resonated with me, was the idea that if you are, inviting in an elemental guardian, make sure that it's worth their while. We think about the Fae, we think about fairies and spirit beings in that way, they are generally not to be trifled with. Their idea of morality, their idea of, the equal exchange of energy, of what's an acceptable offering, etc., etc. It's very different, so when you are going to be working with those beings really deeply, you want to make sure that you are treating them appropriately. And she used to always say to treat them like valued house guests, people that, if let's say that, for example, your in-laws are coming over for the first time, you come in, you take their coat, you offer them a drink, you give them a place of honor to sit, etc., etc. So you really want to make sure you're taking care of them, because if you are disrespectful for them, you could have the opposite of what you were intending in the end. So that said, when you're working with the element of earth in spells or rituals, generally the element of earth represents transformation and potential. I always say, we talked earlier about these associations of midnight, of winter, of death and dying. I always feel like earth is sort of encompasses the whole womb to tomb connection, the idea of, dying, quote unquote, in the West, and then going into the underworld to be reborn in the East. So there's this sort of like, it's a very transitional space. It's a very liminal space, even in a way. So even though the earth is a very solid thing, when we think about earth, we put our feet on it, we walk on it, it's solid. To me, I also think about the elemental energy of earth as being very liminal, very spiritual in a way, very, visceral in that it has to do with the death, the physical, and the death of the body, but also very spiritual at the same time. So some intentions, let's say that and of course I talk about the idea of calling in the elements. Some people do, some people don't. You don't always have to call in every single element to every single spell or ritual you do. If you're doing a spell or a ritual with a specific intention that lines up with a specific element, you might choose to work with just one specific element. And just again, real quick, because I don't think I've said it yet, because I got all excited about just jumping into things. If you're here watching, please make sure you throw hashtag live in the comments. If you're watching on a replay, hashtag replay, especially if you're here watching on Facebook, because Facebook doesn't show me who's here, unlike Instagram, and I would love to say hello. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So if you're only thinking about working just with one element because you're really trying to key in on a very specific energy for your intention, some intentions that might work well with the element of earth. And just real quick, I'm getting a notification that my phone is getting hot, so we might get some weird things happening here, so I apologize in advance if we have any connection issues. It's probably on my end, and hopefully it all works out in the end. So intentions that work well with the element of earth include stability, grounding, rebirth. We talked about death and dying. Hey, Katie. Katie says she's here on Facebook. Thank you for the live. Transformation, personal growth, prosperity, abundance, business, and success, of course. We think about the idea of, when I say stability, I mean and security, the idea of feeling safe in our surroundings and having a living space or even a spiritual space that we're comfortable in, that we feel like we can really thrive and grow out of. To me, that is very much earth energy. And so some ways that you can connect to the element of earth, other than doing rituals like that, which is, of course, a totally valid way of doing it, is to do certain meditations. Some meditations that are very earthy energy include meditations where you are surrounded by earth, meditating on that cave I mentioned earlier, or being in the earth, of course, also being able to breathe. We're just visualizing here. It doesn't have to be realistic. Being surrounded by the earth, being in a cave, feeling like you're being held in a womb. That's stone or earth or dirt. And of course, tree meditations, which are really, really popular. I don't know if any of you have been watching me all along, but I think when I did my psychic protection one, or recently I talked about grounding and centering and shielding, and grounding is often done through tree meditations. So grounding, earth, tree meditations, again, all kind of move together in a really lovely dance. Other things you can do is grounding, like I said just now, or earthing, which I love the term earthing in particular, but usually in reference to the idea of walking barefoot outside, which is one of my favorites. I love being barefoot, especially outside. Or burying things in the ground is another very earthy ritual. So let's say, again, you're doing a spell or a ritual for stability. You might, in that ritual, also bury something in the ground, which is another way to tap into that earth energy. Or gardening, of course, so planting things. Hey, Crafty Pagan Woman, we are doing a live stream today on working with the elemental earth magic. Gardening is another thing you could do. Obviously, a lot of us, for Ostara in particular, tend to plant things. The magic of planting things and watching them grow is another wonderful type of magic that is very much associated with the element of earth. Also, working with clay effigies or even puppets is another thing that you can do, the idea of working with the earth with your hands. So those are some specific things and actions that you can take in spell or ritual that will connect you with the element of earth as well. And of course, in ritual, you can do things like wearing earth colors, green and brown and black, but you can't really see my pants are black. I was wearing khakis earlier, but then I realized they were stained, so I had to change to a different earthy color for you. And of course, in group ritual, one of the things that I love doing is, I generally ask people to volunteer to represent an element in rituals. So when we're calling in all of the elements, we have one person that's for each element, and we'll give them like a scarf that represents that color, so that way they're connecting with the element through the color magic as well. And then again, of course, I mentioned when invoking or inviting, visualizing based on intent. Another good example is if you're doing, I mentioned earlier how it might vary from intention. It can also vary seasonally as well. So if you're doing an impulse ritual, you might visualize water as, the water running underneath the ice in a creek in the woods. As opposed to summertime, you might, visualize crashing ocean waves on a beach. Very, very different energies. Tabitha says that you can also wear shoes with leather soles for earthing. Absolutely. Of course, if your beliefs, lend themselves to that. Some people are anti-leather. But yeah, you can totally do that, dude. For me, I just feel like it's not quite the same unless my feet and my toes are literally like in the dirt and I can feel like the individual like grains of sand or dirt and or blades of grass. It's just not quite the same. But yeah, I can see how wearing leather could work too, especially if you don't have the option to be barefoot. And then finally, some symbols for the element of earth that you might include on your altar. In addition to the colors I just mentioned, so green, brown, black in particular are usually associated with earth. Some other things you might include are crystals, herbs, or the pentacle. So the pentacle that is on the altar. So in a traditional Wiccan or witch altar, usually there's a pentacle in the center, or at least on the altar somewhere, but typically in the center somewhere. So the pentacle is actually intended to represent the microcosm of the planet. So oftentimes when you cast a circle, sometimes you might have that buzzy feeling in your hands, so you might want to ground the energy at the very end. You can use your pentacle for that as well. So your pentacle is also intended to be a place where you can ground because it represents the earth. And then of course flowers, dried flowers, fresh flowers, all the flowers. And then I also had a little list here of vintage materials. So obviously my page, which I think everyone here is familiar with, I resell a lot of vintage pieces intended to be reused as altar decor, home decor for, the witchy person. But some materials that I associate with the element of earth as far as keeping them on my altar, because I tend to like to use those vintage items on my own altars as well. Wood. Like a lot of the pentacles that I have in the house happen to also be wood. That I've bought for myself anyway. We have a lot in the house in general, but my husband and I both have our own things that have become blended over time. But the ones that I tend to gravitate toward are wood. Stone, of course. Like I have a really beautiful piece of, and I think I showed it off last week, but a beautiful piece of round green marble that sits in the middle of one of my altars instead of a regular pentacle, which I associate with earth and grounding in the same way that you might use a pentacle. Glass. I associate glass with the element of earth because to me glass is sort of like the little cousin of clear quartz in a way, which I also associate with earth. And glass, similarly to quartz, is really good for magic of protection and clarity. Hey DXN, we're here talking about elemental earth magic today. Thanks for coming. And then of course lead crystal, which is again sort of like the big cousin or like the little sister of clear quartz, which is very, very similar. So that is what I have today. So that is it for Earth Magic. I hope you guys like that. I'm really enjoying this new series. Earth in particular was sort of easy for me because it's one of my favorite elements that I kind of resonate with the most. If you have one that you resonate with the most, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys really kind of vibe with. But the next thing that I'm going to do real quick is we are going to have a little live sale, which is what I normally do at the end of all these live streams. And then whoever is left, if we still have folks here, I usually offer free Coin Tarot readings to the first 6 people who claim them. But real quick, I am going to be uploading this video to YouTube for people to watch after the fact. So I'm going to do a little sign off, but if you want to be here for the tarot card readings and the live sale, hang out, don't leave just because I'm saying goodbye, because I am not actually going anywhere just yet. So this is just for the folks that are watching on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you really enjoyed the first, technically second installment of my Elemental Magic series. Like I said, next week we're going to be talking about New Moon Magic, and I cannot wait. I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday weekend. I don't know when people on YouTube are watching this, but this is July 4th weekend coming up right now. So if you're going away for the holiday, I hope you have a great one, and I will catch you guys on the flip side next week. Take care. Alright, so Tabitha